One of the core tenets of debate is refuting what the other side says, as specifically as you can. After the affirmative and negative lay out their arguments in the 1AC and 1NC, the rest of the speeches are dominated by this back and forth refutation. As you have likely caught on from previous videos, there's a specific process and some jargon attached to doing this optimally. Let's break it down. When you're responding directly to something the other team said in a previous speech, that is called debating the line by line. The idea is you are answering everything the opponent said in the order they said it on a given flow. The first thing we need to clarify is, what does it mean to answer arguments in order? Where does that order come from? Remember that we flow distinct types of arguments on separate pieces of paper. Counterplans are flowed on a different piece of paper than critiques, which are flowed on a different piece of paper still from advantages. Responses to arguments should be numbered for clarity. The 1AC and 2AC are the first set of responses to on and off case arguments respectively, so they create an ordered series of arguments that the rest of the debate operates off of. Remember, for example, if you're affirmative, you don't have to answer every part of the disad or contradict everything said in the 1NC on the disad in the order that they said it. The 2AC sets the order, so you just need to list your responses. Ultimately, you can prove the plan's advantages are superior to the disadvantage without answering every part of the disad, so there's no need to line by line the disad as it's presented in the 1NC. The same dynamic works when you're negative in responding to arguments in the 1AC on advantages or solvency. Let's walk through some examples to make this process a little more clear. First, let's assume you're giving the 2AC after the 1NC made some case arguments against your advantage. Here's how to approach debating the line by line. First, you want to identify what argument you're answering. This is called signposting. This is done verbally. For example, 1NC1, they said the following. Next, you want to respond to the argument. This is done by applying evidence from your 1AC to explain an argument that refutes the negatives. Part of what informs what you say is making a judgment call. How good is the negative's argument? How good is their supporting evidence? How good is the argument that they're attacking of mine? How good is my evidence? What if they read more evidence and make their argument better? Does the 1AC have a piece of evidence that speaks to the issue the negative is bringing up, or doesn't it? If it's a strong or threatening argument, you may want to make more responses, or possibly read a new piece of evidence. If the argument is not very strong, or the supporting evidence is weak, you may want to just briefly respond. The key thing you need to keep in mind when developing your response is you need to have a warrant, or a reason why your argument is true, within your refuting statement. If you skip that part, you are merely making an assertion in response, which will not be sufficient. Another important thing to keep in mind is organization. You're trying to communicate with the judge. The more ideas you effectively communicate, the better. Things like numbering your arguments or labeling your arguments and making your statements clear, efficient, and discreet will help the judge understand what you are saying. For example, you have read the following impact card that says economic decline increases the propensity for international conflict. Take a moment to pause the video if you would like to read it more closely. Okay. Now, the negative reads the following card in response that argues economic decline doesn't cause war. Take a moment and pause to read this evidence as well. Alright, now, how do we formulate a line-by-line response? We need to take stock of what our card says and what the opponent's card says. The Liu evidence says many things are putting stress on the international system, creating tensions, and could be triggers for war. And economic crises would exacerbate those triggers. The things it lists are technological disruption, migration crisis, anxiety over globalization and protectionism, political polarization, and rising nationalism. The negative Walt evidence says wars are costly and the risk of failure is high. It cites empirics that says both because wars are fought when the economy isn't doing poorly, and because the diversionary war thesis has poor empirical backing, that economic crisis does not correlate with conflict. And the final thing it says is wars don't improve the economy. They sometimes hurt the economy by shocking investors. And generally, wars are usually fought for security gains, not to reverse a slumping economy. So the first thing we have to do is let the judge know what we're talking about. We have to signpost. We would say something like, they say no war, or they say decline doesn't cause war. Then we need to make our response where we explain our argument while responding to our opponents. How do we do that? Well, Walt says that wars are costly endeavors. But obviously wars do happen, and there are many motivations at play in the decision to go to war. The evidence is strong on why using war to boost the economy doesn't make a lot of sense. But you could fight wars for other reasons besides trying to boost your economy, and economic decline could exacerbate those causes. Economic decline could generate a security-based crisis. It is also strong on why the empirics are negative. Recessions and whatnot happen frequently, but big wars do not always follow. But our Liu evidence is talking about what is occurring now and why now might be a unique moment. So we might be able to use that to leverage a response. What if we phrased it like this? They say no war, but decline exacerbates proximate causes like migration, protectionism, and nationalism, and it short-circuits the peace generators like multilateralism, which results in security threats to go to war over. Now is unique because there have never been so many proxy conflicts or backsliding on liberalism and globalization as there is right now. That's the Liu evidence. Let's talk about a different circumstance. Let's talk about the 2C extending an off-case position. In this case, a disadvantage. As we learned in the flowing video and earlier in this video, the 2AC sets the order for our off-case positions. So the 2C is going to attempt to answer the 2AC's arguments in the order that they were made. Here are the arguments in question, assuming we read the China disad from our disad video that states US climate action reestablishes US leadership, which is zero-sum with Chinese leadership, and that Chinese leadership is good. The arguments are: 1. China emits too much to be a climate leader. 2. Chinese leadership fails because of their autocratic government. 3. Other US policies prevent reacquiring global leadership. To respond, you would refer to which argument you're answering, starting with number 1. They say no Chinese leadership. Then you would apply evidence you've already read previously in the debate. China has leadership because. Then you may want to compare why your argument is better than the other side's. Maybe your evidence cites unique data, or is more recent, or assumes something that their evidence does not. Then you may want to read more evidence to substantiate your argument. You go through this process for each affirmative response, and you'll have debated the line by line on the disad. Thanks for watching our video about line by line. See you next time as we introduce more debate concepts.